Welcome back to another week of Let's Discuss with Meg Duke, where we discuss some things perinatal and all things mental health. I am so excited this week. We have Victoria Wigley, founder of All About Embryology. She is a state-registered clinical embryologist with nearly 15 years of clinical experience in an IVF laboratory. Her aim is to use her years of experience and expertise to give patients independent advice and support through their infertility treatment journey. By improving her patients' understanding and providing all the required information in a relaxed, impartial environment, it allows her patients to get back in control and make genuinely informed decisions about their treatment whilst feeling they have that extra support along the way. Welcome, welcome. What a pleasure to have you. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me on.
Oh my goodness. Well, I always like to start with how do we know each other? And often it's because I've DM'd somebody, and that's where we are here. But I've been following you for so long, and this is exactly what a lot of my clients are talking about. Certainly a lot of conversations in the perinatal space. And so I'm so excited to hear all you have to share with us today.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. So tell me, we'll just jump in. It's been 15 years that you've been working in it. How did you get interested in working in embryology?
So it was one of those decisions that I didn't sort of know from the word go that I was going to do it. You see some people now, and obviously the IVF world is much more known about now than it was back when I started. So I really came out of school and I knew that I liked sciences. So I went and I did my degree in human genetics. And then I knew, I didn't have a specific career choice from that. So I knew I wanted to go on and do a master's. So I did my master's in prenatal genetics and fetal medicine, solely because that was the part of the degree that I loved the most. And it was quite an emerging field. And then it was really in that my course organizer, who's Professor Joyce Harper, who's got quite a big social media presence now, she said, each year that there are people that I think would make a good embryologist. And obviously from some of my personality traits, which maybe isn't necessarily a compliment, but she said she thought it would be something that I might be quite good at. And then we got a chance to go into a lab, and we had 2 days shadowing in the labs. And even though it was something I'd never considered as a career choice before, as soon as I was in those labs, I just knew that was what I wanted to do. And then, that's how I started. So sort of after I finished my master's degree, I then started applying for jobs from that point. And then here we are today.
That's amazing. Yeah. And so I know you kind of talked about already, I was curious about what kind of training goes into obtaining a master's in science, prenatal genetics and fetal medicine. And that's really interesting for sure.
Yeah, no, most people will go in with some form of a master's or a PhD, but then the actual training you do. So it's changed since I did it. So when I was a trainee, I applied for a job, and then in-house I did a 2-year training scheme, which was called our ACE certificate back then. And it was a kind of a mixture of practical and theoretical testing. So we would have a logbook that we keep to sort of make sure we've done the right number of cases under supervision. And then we would have a huge chunk where we would be writing, essay questions and stuff. And then it was a viva at the end to check that you were up to the standard. Once you'd passed that, you would then have about another 2 years of clinical practice, and then you could then apply on for state registration, which would then put you up to more of the senior bracket. In the UK, obviously overseas, they're all going to have their own version of that. In the UK now, we've got something that's kind of putting the embryologist more in line with other clinical science specialities. So it's called the STP training route, which is a bit different to what I did, but along the same lines of training programs. So it's really a combination. It's very academic. You have to be an academic to be able to do it, but it combines with a lot of practical training that has to go into it. I mean, you're dealing with stuff, especially if you're doing the injection of the sperm into the eggs. You're on a huge bit of what almost looks like a PlayStation equipment that you're dealing with. So a lot of training goes into being able to sort of be an experienced embryologist. But yeah, it's good once you get through it.
Oh my gosh. It's good though. I mean, it's a very specific and important job that you do. So it's good that you feel well trained for it. And watching the videos of what you do, I just find it so fascinating of like there it is. You're just making, here we are, and you can see it happening. And now we can record it on video, and it's a beautiful and very sciencey thing that's happening.
Well, I mean, that's the beauty of it now, that, you know, I've been able to try and use the platform that I'm building up now on social media. But then, because I've still got the links with my old clinics, I'm able to then go in and do some of the filming that really it takes an embryologist to do, because you know what you're looking for at the right things. And what I mean, I take hundreds of little video clips, and the editing that I've got to do at the end is huge, but I know what the journey of that particular procedure is and what the parts are that I want to be able to show the patients. So it's very lucky that I've been able to still go back into the labs to be able to show that for patients, because it's really something that patients don't often get the chance to see ever. And you can explain it, you know, till the cows come home. But if they don't fully understand it, then it's going to be very difficult. Whereas if they can visually see it, sometimes that really helps patients.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We talk about kind of explaining the why to children, and like why we're doing something, how it works, making processes. And I think adults are the same way, right? We need to understand the how and the why and the where and whatever's going on. And so it's nice. Also, it sounds like you get to do a little video editing, which is maybe not something you had envisioned when you decided to go into the science.
No, it wasn't. And I'm learning on the job, put it that way.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. So I'm curious, I was wondering what some of kind of the biggest misconceptions might be about embryology, IUI, IVF. What are some of the things that you find, some hurdles that you're experiencing, that your patients are, things that you keep coming up against?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because it's a very, you know, tough journey for people to go on. And I think I'd say probably the number one misconception is that when people have been trying to conceive naturally, and they finally make the decision that actually things aren't working naturally and they do need to go and get a bit of help, I think that the common misconception is that by them doing that, they're going to get pregnant, and they're going to get pregnant first time. And
Yes.
I think that's a really tricky one, because especially when people have to, you know, emotionally prepare themselves for going down that route, it's a difficult. I remember once I got told by a lady who used to be the fertility counsellor in my very first clinic when I was a trainee, and she sort of gave all of us a bit of a chat, and she was sort of saying that actually what we've got to realise is that the moment people step foot in the door of a fertility clinic, they're accepting the fact that actually they can't do something that they feel like they should be able to do naturally.
Yes.
And they are now looking for help. So no matter what emotions you're going to experience from these patients, whether they come across as being angry or, you know, they're very tearful, or all of the different emotions that we see day in, day out.
Yes.
We've got to be incredibly empathetic for that. But obviously when these people are going through that journey and they make the decision to get help, then when it doesn't work, it is just heartbreaking, because there is this misconception that actually all it will take is to do a round of treatment. And unfortunately, you know, even, you know, Louise Brown, who's the first IVF baby that was ever born, she's over 40 now. So we're still, we're over 4 decades down the line of when we first started doing IVF, and we can't get it up to that point where we can guarantee pregnancies. We just can't. And it's incredibly difficult. But again, this all goes back to sort of my view on education, and, you know, that we need to really, really start teaching from a much earlier stage than the people that are coming through that need the treatment. We need to start educating earlier, so that people are aware of what potentially might happen and what the treatments are and what the chances of success are, and everything like that.
Oh, I have chills. Thank you for saying that, because it's been a lot. People say some really interesting things when people are grieving or upset or having their troubles. And I can't tell you how many times I've had clients or people, or I just hear anecdotally that people are like, well, just do IVF. Yeah. As though that is, first of all, in any way easy or financially reachable for so many people. And also as though that's the ticket. That's it.
Yeah.
Check that box, and now there are your children, and so it is very important for people to be aware of all that goes into it. And you're right, it's funny, I follow the first US IVF baby on Instagram. I think that her tagline says that, and yeah, and it's been a while, and you know, it's a science, but it's all, I mean, we still don't know a lot what causes some people to have issues with fertility. And
humans are, compared to majority of other species, humans are infertile. We are generally an infertile species. You know, you imagine, you know, when you're wanting to get a litter of puppies, you do one round of artificial insemination, or you just put the male dog in at the right time and it works.
Yes.
And they have puppies. So it's something that we do have to accept. It's very unlikely that we will ever get it to the point of the 100% mark. We can hopefully keep improving with more and more research, but we are away from that at the moment, and that is something that I think we do need to educate people more. And like you say, not giving people the misconception that if they go for IVF, then great, they'll get their baby, and this time next year, they'll have their baby. It unfortunately doesn't work like that. We can try and do as much as we can for patients, but also depending on the cause of infertility, sometimes there's not going to be a straightforward journey for them.
Yes. I'm actually wondering, I did not put this in the outline, so I apologize, but a little pivot, but I'm when I started this conversation with you about coming on, I was assuming that people would know a lot about IVF, and I'm really thinking that I have a number of listeners who might not be aware of what kind of the process is. Could you, not to take too much time, but could you kind of walk through a novice person who's listening because they're curious, or maybe they're starting their fertility journey, or they want to be supportive of somebody in their life who is experiencing fertility struggles? Could you kind of, I don't want you to take too long, or you can take as long as you want.
No, absolutely.
A walkthrough of that, please.
Yeah. So, I'll quickly touch upon IUI first. So IUI is intrauterine insemination. So that is usually the most non-invasive, basic, perhaps starting point for some people. Now, the sperm sample has to be good quality, and the patients have to make sure they've got clear tubes before doing that. But by doing that, what we do is we prepare the sperm sample in the lab to try and concentrate the good quality sperm. And then with a very small catheter, we go through the cervix and deposit the sperm directly into the uterus at the time of ovulation. So that's deemed as kind of the least invasive starting point. Success rates are a lot lower with that than if you do jump to the IVF. So sometimes people will start and have a few cycles of that if they're eligible. Otherwise, if people talk about IVF, what we're talking about is we're talking about ovarian stimulation. So by that, what we're wanting to do is normally each month you get a cohort of eggs that start to grow, and one gains dominancy and you ovulate. In IVF, because we're giving injections with all this external medication, we try and get as many of those follicles that would have originally not grown to grow up. And then at the time that they are at a good enough size, which is about usually 10 to 14 days after they've started their medication, the doctor will go through the vaginal wall with a needle, and will go and puncture each of those follicles, draw out the fluid from the follicles, and we as embryologists then take over and we check through the fluid and we look for those eggs, and then we collect the eggs into the lab. At the same time, like with IUI, we prepare the sperm sample to try and optimize it. And then we combine the sperm with the eggs. Now, depending on how good the sperm is, we either just mix the sperm sample with the eggs. Now, that is called conventional IVF. So when people just say IVF in general, that's usually what they're talking about. If the sperm sample is bad, we take individual sperm and we inject it directly into the eggs. So both of those two methods are trying to get those eggs to fertilize, and then we can grow them up in the lab and then see how the embryos develop, and then transfer the best embryo or embryos. And then that is what we call as IVF.
Amazing. I was sitting there and I was like, you know what? I bet there's somebody here listening who maybe doesn't know the whole story. And that's the thing too. So with IUI versus IVF, there are different hormonal injections and steps that a person has to take to prepare their
Yeah.
body to be ready for that.
Yeah, so IUI is you might have a little bit of medication. It could be completely natural, but it's nowhere near on the level of IVF, because IVF, we're trying to get as many of them to grow, whereas IUI, we don't want all of them to grow, because then you're going to get your octuplets and everything else. So yeah, they have to be a bit more cautious with, they're trying to see which ones would have naturally been dominant with IUI, and just get 1 or 2 usually to ovulate.
Absolutely. And I know, I think most of the listeners who are here probably are familiar with the idea of the photos that you see of the pregnancy announcement. It's covered by a halo of syringes and tests and all of those things that people have to go through in order.
It puts it very much into perspective about their journey.
It really does. Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you too, the education piece. I have to admit, until I had my own fertility struggles, I didn't know a lot about this sort of thing. And of course, colloquially you hear about IVF and that sort of thing, but really not a lot. And it's difficult because we're just doing ourselves a disservice by not preparing people, to be aware of what's going on with their bodies and what could be ahead.
Yeah, I mean, even in education in schools, we talk about the reproductive cycle, and we've a lot talked about don't get pregnant as a teenager.
Yes.
And that is basically what people believe. They believe that it's going to be easy and straightforward. We spend a vast chunk of our adult lives trying not to get pregnant, and then think that
Yes.
when we then stop taking the pill or anything that we've been using, that it will just work, and we are not given any basic education, and that was one of the reasons that I decided to put some stuff on TikTok as well, because it is a slightly younger generation, and it's sort of a means to try and educate people that even if people are in their early 20s, it's not too young to start learning about these things. It's not to say that they will experience problems, but we're at a point now where approximately 1 in 6 couples will need some form of help. And that's a huge statistic to think about. If you think about kind of social gatherings of friends you come out of school or university with or anything, if you think of the group, chances are that there's going to be at least one couple in the group that will need some help getting pregnant.
Absolutely. And we just went through over here in the States our National Infertility Awareness Week. And so a lot of people were talking about, 1 in 6, 1 in 4, 1 in 8, the number of pregnancy losses, the number of fertility struggles, all of that. And it is still something that we're continuing to work on, the stigma as well of, we fight those old, don't let me get too much on my soapbox, but those old patriarchal ideas of we're women and that's our job is to make babies, and then somehow you feel like a failure when your body doesn't do that for you. Like you mentioned earlier, something that there's that word, but should be something that we can naturally do. And so the more that we talk about it, the more normalized people can feel, the more support people can find. And of course, again, like you were talking about, just having an idea of what you have to look forward to. And it's wild. I really don't remember in school, which was a while ago, but I don't remember in school ever learning about, I knew what a period was, but I don't ever remember learning about ovulation and how to get pregnant, besides don't use condoms, birth control sort of thing, but which I don't get me started again on another soapbox in the United States that education is starting to be blocked. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing that would be helpful for people to understand very specifically. This is cervical mucus and what that looks like. And
definitely. I think there's so much to be learned, and then hopefully, like you say, it will start the conversations going, because it still breaks my heart that I've got really close friends who have had fertility struggles, and they still haven't felt that they can come and talk to me or to other friends, and to them they'd feel that everyone else is having it easy. And I have to always say to people, just because you see someone who is carrying a baby or has just done a pregnancy announcement or something, because we're not talking about it, we don't know whether they kept on saying, oh, I don't want babies yet, but actually were going to a fertility clinic and getting help. Or, you know, they actually had a miscarriage that they just couldn't tell people about, and they didn't feel they could tell people. You know, I was talking about this the other day on an Instagram live with someone, that we were saying about how, I don't know how much of it is the same over with you guys, but here it seems that people almost feel that they can't announce a pregnancy before 12 weeks. Yes. And there's this rule that, you know, somebody out there has set this rule that it's 12 weeks. And yes, we know that the chance of miscarriage decrease significantly after 12 weeks. But what I say to people all the time is, actually, if you were to get pregnant and to lose your pregnancy, would you need support from your friends and your family? And if you would need their support going through a situation like that, then what's to stop you telling them before the 12 weeks? Because that's the only reason we're not, is that we feel like we should conceal having a miscarriage if we lose the pregnancy. Mm-hmm. So actually, you know, with this whole, you know, thing where people say, oh, I better not tell anyone because it's only 10 weeks. It actually, you've got to break down why you wouldn't tell someone, because actually all that can happen is you have a miscarriage, you know, and the pregnancy doesn't continue. And actually at that point in time, you may very, very much need people around you to support you through it. So yeah, it's a really difficult one. It's like you said, there's still a huge stigma, which we just need to break by getting these kind of conversations going.
Yeah, I actually remember a little self-disclosure moment here. I remember with my husband when we were pregnant the very first time. I mean, we called everybody. We called the day I found out, and then we had a pregnancy loss. And so the second time I got pregnant, my husband was like, maybe we should wait. So, and I was like, but for me, I think, and this is for me, if I'm gonna share with some people, because there are certain people who I will know and certain less people who I wouldn't have told, but if I'm gonna share the sad with them, I'd like to be able to share the good and be cautiously optimistic or just optimistic, however people want to be. And it is because a pregnancy loss is so difficult. And even in those early stages, I had an obstetrician once keep telling me, like, I was barely pregnant, and I was like, I need you to stop saying that to me, because when you are trying to have a baby and it's been years and you've had pregnancy loss, you see, you know, 2 positive lines or positive on the digital or whatever it is, and you can't, again, everyone's different, but I was very excited and it was very real to me. And so to hear people to say that, so it's also the other thing too, like, we need to start validating ourselves in the journey and saying, we're allowed to be excited, we're allowed to be nervous, we're allowed to share. And yes, absolutely, because going through pregnancy loss alone is, I don't know, unmanageable.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, yeah, you've said it absolutely perfectly, that, you know, it is, and that's why we need support, and we need to be able to talk. I mean, everyone is individual, everyone's approaches are going to be different. Sure. And you can never tell someone the right or the wrong way of dealing with it, but it's sort of to make people realize, you know, that actually they don't have to do it alone.
Yes. Well, and you mentioned too, a story about, you have heard somebody's, first of all, the fact that people feel entitled to be able to ask about baby goals is wild. I hope we can stop that. Like, don't ask people about what their sex life and their child, you know, desires. Yes. People might even, but people might even say, I've not thought about this, that people might actually say, like, oh, we're not ready for kids yet, but really they've been trying and struggling or having issues, but because people feel so entitled to ask, that they're having to not be able to speak their truth.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've got a lot of friends who have just got one child, and as an embryologist, I have never ever asked any of them, would you want a second? Because even if they're not going to come and tell me, I make an automatic assumption in my head that there could well have been a reason. 9 times out of 10, it's not necessarily the right, but I feel like I make that so that it's not my place to ask. It's not my place to ask. If they want to come to me with the information, then that's a different matter. Yes. But yeah, and likewise with friends that don't have children at all. There's some friends that have made that actual choice that they don't want to, and other ones that I don't know, and I would never ask them, because that's their information to share if they want to, and it's certainly not something that great auntie someone should ask at a wedding.
So true. So true. Well, and also this is another topic for another podcast episode, but people who are emphatically childless, also stop asking those people to, right? Like we're all doing what we want and doing what we can, and let's start the charge to stop asking people. Absolutely. So I'm curious, what are the things that you do to help people learn about their options and encourage them to feel confident in advocating for themselves throughout this journey?
So I've kind of got two different avenues. So as we've sort of touched upon, a big drive that I really feel passionate about is the education side. So that's why I'm sort of doing the social media, as regularly as I am, trying to get, just some solid, easy to understand information out there for people to understand and follow. So that's one side of it. The other side is the consultations that I offer one-on-one with patients. So because, and actually the one good thing that's come off the back of COVID is that actually, we're now doing a Zoom where we're not anywhere near each other. Likewise with consultations, probably before COVID, the thought of speaking to a medical or practitioner or anything over the phone or over video call would seem not very normal, whereas now we're all completely used to it. So it's been something that actually I can do from my home. I'm not restricted, geographically. I had one patient who was living over in Bali. So, it's, you can completely sort of, that generally, yes, there are different ways some clinics operate, but generally speaking, the basic understanding is very similar. So I can offer patients, so either my patients will be first timers who are just starting their journey and they're feeling incredibly overwhelmed. There is an absolute bombardment of information that they get given in that first stage of consultations with the doctor, and often they come away from that consultation more confused than when they went in.
Absolutely.
And then there's this sort of big sort of trying to understand what's happening. And I've seen, and the more I got to spend with my patients when I was still working as a lab manager in my last role, I realized that actually there's a bit of a black hole between when the patients see the doctor and they're talking about the causes of infertility, they've done the diagnostic tests, then they start talking about the stimulation and potentially what's going to happen with the starter part of their treatment. And then suddenly they're starting this journey and they don't really know what's going to happen from that point of egg collection onwards. And I realized that even sort of managing patients' expectations about, what are we looking for when we're, doing sort of embryo grading, or what do we expect for a fertilization rate, and why do we grow them to day 5 rather than day 3, and all things like this. If you can really instill that understanding in these people who are very early stages of their journey, they will feel so much more in control. They will understand what's going to happen, and really feel like that this is them back in control. They felt potentially very vulnerable when they've started it, and actually if they can get themselves back in control, then brilliant. So that's kind of one group of my patients. And the other group are the people that have maybe had 2 or 3 cycles already, and they're at the point where they're wanting to know what next. What is it worth now exploring some of the add-ons, so maybe the genetic screening side, or anything that might change a cycle outcome. And obviously, especially, I don't know, again, I don't know sort of how the press deals with stuff over with you guys, but in the UK, fertility clinics can get very given a bad press, shall we say. So in the way that it can come across that all these clinics are just trying to get money out of the patients. and they're throwing a lot of unnecessary additional extras and all extra tests and all extra treatments that potentially patients don't need. Now, I have to admit that I've been very fortunate in all the clinics I've worked out that certainly hasn't ever been the case.
Mm-hmm.
But having started, this new business where I'm able to speak to some patients and really go through their treatment cycles with them and understand what they are being offered, I have realized that actually people are being offered stuff that maybe they don't need.
Sure.
And your patients are very, very vulnerable in these situations, because if a doctor or a clinical member of staff says to them, oh, should we try this in this cycle, or should we do this, and then they'll sort of say, oh, okay, well, is that worth doing? What are the pros and cons? And if they're sort of very briefly said, well, it could be good for this, or there's some paper that says it's good for this, and then they'll think, well, if I say no, then am I going to ruin my chances?
Right.
But then they're thrown with a £500,000 extra fee on top of their already incredibly expensive treatment.
Right.
So really my role for these particular patients is someone who's completely independent and unbiased and impartial for these people. Mm-hmm. It does not make any difference to me whether they choose to do the extra treatments or not. I'm here to give them all of the information and to make them fully understand the pros and cons, why they might be being offered it, whether it's worth contemplating that route versus that route, and really just increase their understanding. And it goes back to what we were saying, it then puts them back in control, because they can then make that genuinely informed decision. They're not being, guided by, someone that they maybe feel is pushing them for the wrong reasons.
Right.
They can then make that choice, and they can ask the right questions when they go back to their doctor. I'm not there to change anything. I'm just there to help them along the way and make sure that they know what they're signing up to before they go ahead with it. And in my mind, knowledge is absolute power. If we can, help these people by giving them that knowledge, then, it will help their journey hugely when they go through treatment.
That is such an interesting piece of that. You're absolutely right. And I've had this conversation with other professions outside of just perinatal and reproductive, but about like when we are ignorant to medical procedures or things that are going on, and then you're like, do I need this? But the person's telling me I need this, but are they just trying to book an extra vacation or right? And so it can be helpful to have somebody who to be able to bounce questions off of and feel like you're making the whole theme of this is education. You're making an informed decision based off the best information that we have, off the best understanding of the individual's situation to be able to move forward.
No, absolutely. And, then there's someone that I always say on a Sunday night, when suddenly you've got, a consultation booked with your clinic on the Monday, and then you're panicking and you're thinking about these things. We all do it. I'm just as bad. You turn to Dr. Google and you can get yourself, and there will always be an answer that you're looking for. And usually when we're in that kind of state of mind, you're looking for the worst case scenario on something. Mm-hmm. And there will be something out there, whether it's in a forum or some misinformation or something, that it can be very, very difficult for these people. So I always say to my patients, when I can, and I've got my phone on me or I'm access to emails, I can just answer a really quick question to stop them spiraling at that point. So someone that they can kind of turn to and that will check in on them and just make sure that, that they're doing all right. So it's giving a support side as well, which it has been a really lovely side to it that I didn't originally think I would be able to provide to people. I thought my role, I'm a scientist, I thought my role would always just be science. But it's sort of being that person for someone, actually, I've realized means a lot for them emotionally, which is really lovely.
That's so true, because you're right with the scientific piece. Not that all people who participate in the sciences don't have the ability for empathy, but you're right. You don't need to be as empathetic when you're in a lab, and
Absolutely.
it's a very scientific, procedural, this, but this, but this. Whereas when you're talking about a human who is going through what can be the most or one of the most difficult things that they'll experience, it's so great to have somebody who has the science knowledge, but then is also able to have that, bedside manner of being able to say that. And I also want to put in big, bright red capital letters, stay off Dr. Google, people.
Yeah, I know.
I said that on this show. I have said it to many a client.
Yeah.
Stay off Dr. Google. Yeah.
But we're all guilty. I do it. I'm just as bad as
Yes,
just
yes.
the next person. But yeah, it's not a good thing to do when you're feeling in that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because oftentimes, as you mentioned, the worst case scenario is often what pops up first, and then we spiral and we have panic and anxiety or stressors that are related to something that we don't even necessarily know is actually what's in front of us. So that's great that people have that opportunity to get with you so that they can stay off Dr. Google.
Definitely.
Yeah. I was wondering too, another jaunt off the beaten path here. Could you go into a little bit of education about kind of egg quality and what those rating systems look like? So that, because again, I know there are people who are listening who this is the first time they've ever spent much time with the topic.
Yeah, no, of course. So we don't really grade the eggs as much when we retrieve them. What we look for with eggs is we look for the maturity.
Yes.
So we look to see if it's undergone its final stage of maturation. But with the embryos, when we start growing the embryos up, that's when we can start seeing the quality. And so when the patients get calls from the embryologist, we're able to tell them two things. Are the embryos growing at the right rate of development? So there should be a certain cell stage at a certain time point. So are they growing at the right rate? And what's their quality? So by quality, what we're looking for is things, when you do a cell division, you have a single cell that divides into two. It should do a nice even division into two. If you get little bits that break away as it divides, they're called fragments. And the more fragments you have, the worse the quality is then going to be. So there's grading things, and we look at, if the cells are granular and things like that. So that's generally how we start grading them in the early stages. And then when they start forming a blastocyst on day 5 or day 6, which is just the name that we give the embryo at that point, we start looking at a few other factors, because it's quite different at that stage. But we then really get an idea with the patients what their cohort of embryos are looking like, and do they have a good quality. And obviously we as embryologists would select based on the quality, so the best dividing embryos, and that would be the way we select when we do the embryo transfer.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I know I've had some people in the past who were talking about, and it's a whole other language, a whole other realm of knowledge. And also, thank you. I did say egg earlier when I meant to say embryos. Thank you for catching that.
Oh, that's all right. No.
But yeah, and it really truly is, and it's so much to know and understand, and what choices that you make based on the grading and the quality, and all of that stuff that needs to be known ahead of time, so it's not a surprise when we get to that stage.
So they know when that phone call is going to come, because this is the biggest thing I hear from patients is that awful anxiety of waiting for the phone to ring and then getting told something and then getting incredibly upset by the result. But actually, it may well be. So I've had people before who have had a completely normal fertilization rate, but in their head, because there's been some that haven't fertilized, they've, thought that it is the worst thing that's happened, and will only focus on the ones that haven't fertilized. And it's about just making sure that they knew in advance what to expect. So when you get that phone call, you're saying, well, okay, I'm looking for 60 to 70% of my eggs. So I know at this point how many I should be expecting. And if I get more, a bonus. If I get less, then we can obviously discuss that at that point. But I know what I'm expecting. So anything that like that we can do. And patients, embryology is such an intensive job to have, and the embryologist time is so caught up in the lab with the lab procedures that really you don't get much of a chance to come out and chat this kind of stuff with your patients. And it was only really when I moved to my smaller clinic and then I became the lab manager that I really gave this a focal point, because I had time to do it, because I was working in a smaller clinic. I managed my own time, and I could then dedicate time to spending with the patients. And it was only at that point that I really realized that they don't have that knowledge beforehand. And if you can equip them with that knowledge beforehand, they'll then find it. And, even if they, suddenly went, oh, it's you on the phone again, calling, like, even if they heard my voice, because I'd spoken to them in advance, even something like that would be such a sort of calming thing for the patients. Even before I told them the results, we can't determine what the results are going to be.
Right.
Your loveliest of patients, when the results aren't good, it is a really difficult phone call for us to make.
Right.
But if they've spoken to you before and they know, how you're going to explain it and, what you're looking for, it just takes that slight edge off it, which I think, if anything like that you can do will really help these people.
Well, another one of those lovely phrases that people love to throw at people in fertility is just calm down, just relax, it'll happen. And it's like, I don't think people understand how stressful every specific day and every new piece of information and every failed round or new period or negative test or whatever it might be. And so while I am not telling everybody to calm down because it'll help you get pregnant, it is nice to have moments where we can seek some solace and some calming moments, because we know what is coming and what we can look forward to and be prepared for that.
Exactly. I mean, it's, it's like anything in life, if you equip yourself in advance, it's not going to change the outcome, and it's certainly not going to change the heartbreak, when things don't go right, but it just gives you a little bit of help to deal with it, because you're in a better position to start with, and it's, as I'm sure you've mentioned, like, it is an absolute roller coaster of emotions that you go through, and every step is a hurdle. Every step's a hurdle where things can go wrong, and you think, yes, I've got to this point, but then you can't almost let yourself get excited, because you don't know what's going to be the phone call the next day. So it is a very difficult process that people will go through.
Absolutely. So I had a question for you from your birthday post, which it's a little after your birthday, but happy birthday.
Oh, thank you very much.
And by the time this airs, it will be like a month past your birthday. So people who know you're going to be like, what is she talking about? But I stalked you on the Instagram, and so on some of your posts that I love. I really love the one from your birthday, though, that you were talking about taking care of yourself and not letting your battery deplete, because we wouldn't allow like our cell phone battery to deplete. So let's make sure that we're not doing that to ourselves. And I was just curious, what are some things that, perhaps if you don't mind sharing, that you do for yourself, or something that you do that you encourage people to do to take that time for themselves to make their self-care a priority?
No, I mean, it's absolutely, and the older I'm getting, the more I realize just how important it is, and we don't do enough of it, and we don't do enough of it because we might feel that we're being selfish or self-indulgent or anything like that. I mean, I have really, in the last couple of years, and one of the decisions actually to come out of the lab was to protect myself, because I've got a young family myself, and I was working in such a high pressured environment constantly. And going back to what I was saying about the small clinic, it was absolutely brilliant for a lot of things, because there was only me and one or two other members of staff, so much fell on me, and obviously I had the rapport with a lot of my patients, but it meant I was having patients who, and they didn't mean to, but they were sort of saying, I was working part-time because I'd just given birth to my second baby, and I I was having patients saying to me, oh, is it this weekend you're working, or are you not working this weekend, or or you don't do a Friday normally, do you? But is there any chance you could come in? And I was finding that I was coming in, and I was,
of course,
ignoring myself. I was putting my family to the back because I was so desperate to help these people. And there was one moment that I had a real realization that this was a little bit too much, and I could potentially burn myself out, was when I came in to do a particular procedure that the other embryologist wasn't trained to do. So I brought my 2 children in. One, I think, was 8 months at the time, no, about a year maybe. And I came back up and she'd done a poo when I was doing the ICSI. Obviously she had a nappies and everything on. And I was on my office floor, because we don't have baby changing stuff in a fertility clinic. So I was on my office floor. I'd finished the procedure with my scrub still on, changing her nappy on the floor in there. And I suddenly went, oh, what am I doing? Like,
what a moment.
Yeah, it was a real moment. And I wouldn't change any of it, because I am proud of what I could do for my patients. And I think what made me a good embryologist was that at that point in time, I gave everything to them. And obviously it's not sustainable for someone to live like that, but it was how I wanted to be as an embryologist. So certainly now I am trying to focus more on kind of me and my family. So, we've got a dog now, so even things like making sure I go out and do my dog walks, getting fresh air, exercising. I love exercising, but I do sort of an outdoor boot camp and things like that. It just resets me and, helps me look after myself. And so I say to patients, anything they can do throughout their treatment to look after themselves, they must prioritize. People will often ask me, will it help their chances if they have acupuncture or reflexology and things like that? That I can't say conclusively it will. I can't give them any firm statistics that will say, yes, you're going to improve your chances. What I will give them is the information that they are making a decision about something that will make them feel calmer, that will make them feel less stressed, more in control, because they are choosing to do something for themselves and for their fertility treatment. And without a doubt, that can only be a good thing. If it doesn't help their chances, it will help them and their journey to get into that end point. So I've always said, I've had some doctors that, I work with, and I hear them saying, oh, this is ridiculous, don't do this or don't do that. And I'm completely the opposite. I think whilst I'm never going to fill people with hope, and I think you can get to the point where it's almost a little bit obsessive with some of the stuff that they might read online, where they're told they have to, have their bath water at this temperature, or they have to have, take this supplement 15 times a day, or they have, completely plastic free, where, we can all try and do everything we can to make ourselves as healthy and as good a shape and position as possible. But we also have to live our lives. And we have to do that in a way where we're looking after ourselves without getting too, caught up in a lot of the hypes and things out there. Because at the end of the day, we still need to be people, and it's a tough journey to go through. And so if you can look after yourself and not put too much pressure on yourself, you're going to stand yourself in the best stead you can.
Thank you for all of that. And you mentioned something again. I just keep having these things. You'll mention something, I'm like, oh, here's 17 more questions I want to ask you. But okay. The one thing that you mentioned that I just wanted to share, that I've been speaking to colleagues about more, and I teach over at the University of Kansas, and we're doing graduation next weekend. Again, by the time this posts, it will have passed, so never mind, doesn't matter. But we're talking about people in helping professions where we encourage people, everything that you just said, so beautiful, right? And we'd say taking care of yourself, prioritizing, making sure that you have good boundaries and all of that. And then you also find yourself changing a nappy on the floor of your lab because you want to, because you have something that can help people. And so you have this need, right? Like I'm going on vacation and it's like, how many clients do I take while I'm on vacation? And because I want to make sure that I don't miss too many, but I also, and it is that thing where even I guess I'm speaking to people in the helping professions where it's like, we also need to give ourselves permission to sometimes switch off and take care, and the world won't end without us. But it's
Absolutely.
tough.
Yeah, it is tough. And I think when you're dealing with people who you can see are finding it really difficult, I used to just take it all on myself. And I would come in, if I'd done an ICSI for one of my favorite patients, and I'd come in the morning and, if they were in the time lapse and, you'd go up to the kind of screen and be able to tell the fertilization. And my steps towards the screen would be like heart palpitations going, please, please, please have fertilized. And patients often don't realize how much we do take that on ourselves.
Wow.
Because we really want these people for it to work.
Of course.
And especially the ones that you get, attached to, because you're just, you've spent a lot of time with their treatment journeys. You're desperately willing it along. And the best thing is when the pregnancy results come in. And in my last clinic, my embryology office was just down the corridor from the nurse's office. And so when I was out of the lab and up in the office, I would then, we'd get the results would come through onto the system. So I'd be sort of checking my system in and amongst my work. And then I'd hear so the nurses, and there'd be a little sort of whoop. A result would come in. And then you go on and check and be like, yes, they did.
Yes.
Sort of, I would be like, I want to be in the background when you're calling the patients to tell them. And, we get so invested in it as well. And especially if you are working in a smaller clinic, because these patients become like family, you're in the journey together with them. But yeah, it can take its toll on you, when in the long run, but at the time it was how I wanted to be for them.
Right. Absolutely. And then we recognize the things that aren't working anymore and we make changes with new information, right? We're always able to be flexible and change and adapt to where we move forward. I feel like I could ask you 100 more questions, but I appreciate the time that you have given me so much. What an education and what a powerful conversation for everybody who is listening and watching. So I wanted to also make sure that where can everybody find you?
So I've got the social media channels. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. All about embryology is the handle. And then I've got a website which is www.allaboutembryology, all is one word, .co.uk. So that just gives a bit more information about me, and obviously booking on if people want to book for consultations. And as I said, it doesn't matter where people are in the world. If I can help them, I will do. All the information is on there.
And that's wonderful because we do, obviously, I'm in the States. I have a lot of listeners in the States, but we have a lot of listeners in Canada and Germany and South Africa, surprisingly, and everywhere. So you can get a hold of her and get some assistance walking through your journey as well. All of that information will be in the show notes if anybody needs to be able to click onto that. And so thank you again so much for your intellectual and emotional labor. And everybody else out there, be curious, not judgmental. Bye.